Ben Hardy here, and in today's video we are taking the 2022 Ram 1500 Rebel GT off-road, and let's quickly get into some specs with the truck and then let's take it off-road. So this is the off-road package for Ram. So it's got skid plates underneath, and you guys can see this skid plate has already been used. That wasn't me, that was not me. 33-inch tires from the factory, mounted on 18-inch wheels. Now this one has the four-corner air suspension, as you can see. Sorry about the wind noise in today's video, by the way. It is extremely windy, and has the same setup in the back because, again, it's got the four-corner air suspension. And then the GT package, what that adds is an exhaust, a cold air intake. It has some custom interior bits as well. It doesn't really add to the off-roadness of the Rebel. It just makes it louder and, you know, makes the interior look a little bit cooler. But anyways, let's see how this performs off-road. I just took the GMC Sierra 1500 AT4 off-road last week, so I guess we'll be able to see if this, you know, holds a candle to it. So we are starting our off-road adventure here in the 2022 Ram Rebel GT. If you guys are wondering, right now we are in the normal suspension setting. I will actually raise it up to the off-road setting if it'll let me. There we go. And I will explain why using the off-road setting doesn't make sense unless you really need the ground clearance to go over some rocks, because it is like driving on stilts. That's the best way to describe it. If you've ever walked on stilts, just that stiff feeling you get, it's pretty much what you get here. Hopefully you guys can see with the bumps. And it's not popping through on camera too well, but it's definitely pretty rough. We're gonna pop up here just for fun. Why not? There's one thing I do like about the Rebel is I mean, it's a full-size truck, so it's definitely got some, you know, length and girth to it, but it's small enough that I can kind of maneuver around the trail. And it's pretty easy to drive overall. And the other thing that I love is I'm in four-wheel auto, and you guys can see this hill's kind of mucky, kind of gross. Boom. Can just crawl right up it. Four-wheel auto does really well in this truck. I haven't had to use four-wheel high at all. If you guys are wondering, I do the exterior shots first before I do this interior point of view to give myself some, you know, idea of how the truck drives off-road before I give you guys any sort of impressions. And yeah, I had it in four-wheel auto the whole time. Didn't have to go into four-wheel high. If you're wondering why I didn't try out two-wheel drive, well, I know it's just gonna spin. That's just what this truck will do. Every single truck will just spin out on these trails in two-wheel drive, especially considering the snow and the ice. And everything else. And also, hello. I always gotta say hi to that. Don't worry, I don't even know the person, but I always gotta say hello because I literally am out here every single week filming one of these reviews, and I always drive by that little encampment, and the person almost always like walks out and just looks at me, never says anything. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, kind of weird. But anyways, continuing along, the thing I would like to say with the Rebel is it's pretty good at soaking things up with this air suspension, but it's not as good as a Rebel that just has the standard suspension. I will say that the air suspension has a lot of utility to it. I'm not sure if off-roading is necessarily one of those. I did lower the tire PSI. You guys can see I'm right around 40 with all of them. Way below the factory setting, especially for the front tires. I was going to go lower, but I figured that I'd want it to be somewhat close to the factory setting with at least one set of the tires, so that it's, you know, realistic to what it comes with from the factory, because it's 55 front, 45 rear, which you guys know would have been a disaster off-road, so that's why I had to lower it a little bit. Also, you guys can see here, maneuverability, great. Also, we're gonna avoid this rock over here because that thing will definitely blow a tire. The next thing I would like to mention is the steering. Is super light, which is great for on-road use, but it's not very direct. And so I kind of find myself, you guys will be able to see in the video too, just to get little turn inputs, I'm like, you know, cranking the steering wheel pretty far. And we're all 40. We got the tires at the right temperature, so they're all the same PSI for once. But yeah, I mean, it does pretty good. And I guess another thing I'd like to mention is, because this 5.7 Hemi is significantly lighter than the 6.2 supercharged Hemi you have in the TRX, the front end does not dip down a massive amount, and this has less ground clearance in a TRX. But I have found myself going through certain circumstances that I have plowed through with the TRX. When I say plowed through, I mean the front end of the TRX just came down full compression and just slammed through the ground. Whereas this, same speed, I actually didn't plow through. So yeah, there is a benefit to the Rebel over the TRX in certain circumstances. And again, this isn't like a high performance Baja vehicle by any means, but the front end, as you can see, stays up enough that it doesn't plow down. That being said, one of the people that had this truck before me definitely had a little bit of fun with the front skid plate. I'm guessing that was a rock. It looks, I mean, that thing is, it's tough. It's definitely hard, and so the fact that they dented that in says that they had a fun meeting with a rock. Other stuff we should talk about that is kind of, you know, related to the off-road is just comfort in this truck. With these seats and everything. And I know it's kind of weird to talk about on an off-road course, but I think it's important, right? Because if a vehicle is super uncomfortable from a seat perspective off-road, then it might not be worth it. These seats hold you in place pretty well. They are wide. They're wider than me by quite a bit, so I do move around a little bit in the seat. But I mean, if you're like, you know, I'd say like 220 plus pounds. I mean, depending on where you hold your weight, you'd probably be able to fill out these seats enough that you wouldn't move around like I am. So I guess take that into account, but otherwise they're comfortable. Another benefit with this GT package is the paddle shifters, actually. So on stuff that, you know, you want to get some engine braking, you just throw it into the manual mode and you can do that. Woo! So you guys can see I can keep it, oh, I want to avoid that. I can keep it at higher RPM, so I get a little bit more engine braking, which is great for terrain like this because our brakes aren't going to be much use to us. If you're wondering why, think about it. We got snow that's hard as rock right now, actually. The ground is super cold and frozen as well, and so I'll just show you guys right here. Look at this. Slam on the brakes. Yeah, so, you know, ABS system going into overdrive, and so suffice to say, you're going to want to use a lot of engine braking on a trail like this. The one thing to say though about the gear shifts here is they aren't necessarily the quickest. I will say that. The truck does a good job. It's smooth, but like downshifts and upshifts, it takes a second. And I didn't notice how bad this was until I drove this back to back with my Gen 3 Raptor. And if you guys haven't had a chance to drive a Gen 3 Raptor, if you ever, you know, find a way, I'd recommend, so you can at least see that transmission. That thing is just snappy with downshifts and upshifts. And it wasn't until I drove that after this that I was like, wow, the Rebel is kind of slow with the gear shifts. But that being said, with most off-road trails, you're pretty much going to stay in the same gear most of the time, usually second to third depending on the speed. With this, I've been spending more time in second gear than third because I haven't been getting up to high enough speeds to really allow third for too much of a distance. And then the other thing that I guess I'd like to mention is this truck's fun to take to the mud because you can kind of spin the tires a little bit, and it's, I don't know. And here's what I'm talking about. Boom. That is an area where you guys can see the up and down like that, little whoops. That is one specific area that with the TRX, I bottomed out. And this truck did not bottom out at all. So yeah, pretty cool. And I guess this is our last little thing until we get to the next trail. So we have to start this trail off with some fun. So we're gonna hold down the brake for a second. You know what? We gotta have a little bit of fun with the Hemi. Which I do want to comment on. There are some slight things about the Hemi that I don't like off-road. Now the first, and it's not specifically I guess the engine, I guess it's just how they have it set up with this truck. And the first thing is just how much dead pedal there is with the gas pedal. Like, there is a significant spot where you kind of have to press in quite a bit and nothing happens, and then it comes on. And the problem is, when it comes on so hard that you just spin out, which can be fun in certain circumstances, right? For donuts and stuff like that. But when you're just trying to go down a trail and you just need a little bit of torque, right? It's nice to be able to just, you know, get a little bit of power, not all of the torque all at once. I mean, it's pretty crazy. And my windows are fogging up, so I gotta switch to the full front defroster right there so that we can see. But anyways, continuing along, aside from that, the other thing that's nice with the maneuverability on these trails, again, is this is just the right size where I can fit on the trail and go through. And you guys can see this mud here is mucky. Ooh. It's gonna be fun for me to clean this one up. Moving on from that, on the other hand, I'm just gonna do a little bit of driving. Not really gonna talk too much, just kind of let you guys see what's happening. Ooh! Went through the wrong spot. My bad. We're good though. Okay, now this is our high-speed portion. Gonna come around the cusp and then floor it. Manual comes in. And this is another thing about the air suspension, is now popped into the aero mode, so I got to try to pop it back into normal mode before I get into this trail so I don't plow through the ground. Oh. I'm just gonna go back in automatic now. This is back in normal ride height setting. Again, all these trails are too fast. I guess that's another downside about the off-road setting, is you don't really get too much speed with it. It's like 20 miles an hour and then it sets down. And so you gotta go kind of slow with the off-road mode if you actually want to use it. And this is a big dip. Ooh. I guess the other thing I want to comment is on the tires. Ram did a really good job with the tires. They get really good grip. Ooh. That was mucky. They get really good grip, which is great on trails like this when you have a bunch of snow, mud, and sand, and some hard-packed areas, so I don't slide all over the place. And I guess that's the one thing that I will give the benefit to the air suspension, is it does keep the back end planted really well. I still prefer the 5-link coil, and you know, compared to the competition, the GMC AT4, Chevy Trail Boss, and the Ford Tremor, and you know, the soon-to-be Tundra TRD Pro, which is kind of in a different segment than this, but you know, somewhat close. Ooh, this area is rough. Here's what I have to say is, well, the new Tundra uses 5-link coils, so that'll be kind of similar to this. But the other ones, they use leaf springs in the back end, and you definitely feel the difference. This stays planted, so you feel a little bit more confident with the truck. However, this truck is limited by its shocks, not its suspension, actually. So the funny thing is, those trucks are kind of limited by the suspension because you have to hop around a little bit, and so you got to kind of slow down a little bit because of that. Whereas this, you just don't have enough from the shocks. You need a little bit more heavy duty shocks to go at higher speeds, and so this is kind of limited more by the shocks itself. But again, it stays way more planted than the other ones. In terms of the ride quality, it does feel smoother on the trails. Going over bumps, they're all pretty similar though. That's what I would say, is when you go over a bump, they all soak it up pretty much the same, and there's more brakes. But this, when you're not going over bumps, it just stays nice and planted, and it feels a little bit smoother. So we'll quickly sum things up here with the Rebel for our off-road review. So ground clearance is great, grip is great as well, comfort's great. From a driving perspective, this would be a vehicle that I'd be fine with taking on a long off-road road trip. And you know, the steering's lighter than I would want it. I wish they had like a heavier steering mode, but that's fine. It's still direct enough that it's fine, but you know, you guys can see how much I've had to move the wheel. And also I've felt the need with this truck to, like, you know, kind of like white knuckle a little bit instead of like having a looser grip like I can with some other vehicles. Anyways, continuing along from that, suspension's really compliant and nice. It stays nice and planted. And so, you know, should you buy this over a Tremor or an AT4 or Trail Boss for off-road purposes, if you want a truck that's a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more compliant, that's where the Rebel shines, definitely. Ground clearance is great. The only downside to this that I see compared to the AT4 and compared to the Tremor is just how the power is delivered. This, like I said, it's like an on-off switch, and it's kind of harsh. Whereas, especially with that diesel AT4, that thing was just torque, which was great. But yeah, this on the other hand, it's definitely, it's like an on-off switch, so that's a little bit of a downside. But this is a great off-road truck overall. As an entry-level off-road truck, it's great, and it sounds amazing. You guys heard the exterior clips with the exhaust. This GT package sounds great. And so, you know, as an overall rating, what I'd have to say is, you know, from an off-road perspective, right, this isn't on the level of a Raptor or TRX, obviously. But, you know, as an entry-level off-road truck, I would give this a 9 out of 10 if it didn't have air suspension. With the air suspension, 8 out of 10. I just don't like the air suspension. Good thing Ram makes it as optional equipment. It's like a $2,000 option. Don't get it. That's just my recommendation. I would get a Rebel with standard suspension. Obviously, again, like I said, there's benefits with the air suspension. You guys know those. But from an off-road perspective, the standard suspension definitely does better. And I know that because I owned a Rebel with standard suspension and took it off-road a little bit.